América es el largo camino de los indios. Ellos son estas cumbres y aquel valle y esos montes callados perdidos en la niebla y aquel maizal dorado y el hueco entre las piedras y la piedra desierta.
Yes, yeah,
y aquel maizal dorado.
I think, that's always been one of the dangers of, I think it's Western hegemony, that, that you can have one way of one knowledge system that's valued over all other knowledge systems of the world, that you can have fields of study that are basically silos, which allows for that kind of reductionist thinking, kind of thinking in isolation from all other sectors of society or of the environment. And that's a very dangerous way to think because you can cause impacts without thinking about what the impacts are on the rest of society, or without thinking about the impacts on the environment or the natural world. And I think that's the way I see these particular kinds of genetic technologies operating, that, because they have the power to manipulate organisms at the cellular level, that's where they focus their work. Without thinking about the impact not only on the organism, but that organism's relationship to the rest of the world. And so when you're just kind of having that myopic, view, it's very easy to not really think about the broader impacts of what you're doing.
El desarrollo tecnológico, el desarrollo científico, si no hay en este proceso de investigación un equilibrio, esto va a generar graves problemas y lo sigue generando. Por ejemplo, la ingeniería genética que quiere inventarse mutaciones y todo a base de lo natural, de la genética biológica, yo creo que está cometiendo un error porque va a poner en un desequilibrio total, porque en sí, el bosque vivo, la selva viviente en sí, hace todo este proceso de desarrollo genético naturalmente. Por eso nosotros respetamos, porque nosotros como hombres, como seres humanos, no somos los seres máximos, sino somos un complemento. Somos parte de este gran universo. Por eso yo creo que todas estas invenciones que lo quieren hacer, por ejemplo, en las Islas Galápagos, ya están empezando a desarrollar estos temas, va a generar un desequilibrio total, porque los seres protectores que hacen toda esta configuración genética, la evolución genética, lo van a desequilibrar. Y al desequilibrar, estos seres se alejan, se van.
The Cartagena Protocol calls for precautionary principle, which I think is very essential. Where you do not in the simplest term, what you do not understand, where you do not understand its entire implication, you press the brake. So you're playing with a technology that you know that you don't have a full understanding about, and this directly impacts human health and everything, and the environment. So you don't care. Some of these people don't really care about the implication of these things, and they're prying on the ignorance again of the African countries, and they're also using Africa as a petri dish and as a dumping ground, which is very scary and annoying. So you leave your territories, you come down to Africa where no one can say, hello, stop that, to dump your technologies here. You want to test run here, thing here, you want to test here, you want to do it It shouldn't happen. It is an anomaly. It should not be so, because if you think that these things are so good, why not keep them in your community? Keep them in your countries. Keep them in your territories. Use them. Grow with them. Enjoy them for like 20 years. Let us see and say, oh, like, that's fine. I think we want. But you have not explored that already. Why are you coming to Africa? Why? We have mosquitoes, yes. Malaria, yes. But there are better ways to manage these things than coming to tweak the gene of mosquito to what happens when the mosquito becomes resistant to all these things that you're doing, or developed into something else. Will you be here for the bites? No. It will still be left for the Africans, and it will develop to something else, and then you come back with your aid. Oh, we are coming back to rescue. Always wanting to play the rescue mission on Africans. I don't think it's right. I don't think they are really paying attention to what happens to when these things go wrong. I don't think anyone pays attention to that. So Africa has always been seen as a dumping ground.
Gene drives are probably one of the most powerful technologies we've seen. They involve the ability, just by changing the genetic code of one organism, to impact entire species or entire ecosystems. And as such, you know, the impact that the sort of leverage they can have over biodiversity, over food systems, over people's life is massively multiplied. So it's a really key example of a technology that needs to be governed. In some ways, it may actually be an ungovernable technology. And the speed with which this technology has emerged, with support from militaries, from billionaires, from major players in the biotech industry, is extremely alarming. So this is a technology that should not be getting out of the bottle, shouldn't be getting out into nature, and it certainly shouldn't be transforming our ecosystems and our food systems.
Fortunately, when the gene drive files came out, I think that the Secretariat at the Biodiversity Convention realized that they had a problem, because they could read the files themselves and see that that the Gates-funded political consultants were literally even writing the independent interventions of scientists for them. So that did result in the development of a conflict of interest policy, or really what it is a declaration of interest type policy, because it's okay for everybody to come to the table with their different priorities and their different biases, but when they're hidden, as it was with the case that was what was uncovered by the gene drive files, that's really problematic, because if you have people representing themselves as being independent, uninfluenced scientists who in fact are being influenced and even are having words put in their mouths by the political consultants, that's really troublesome for the integrity of the process.
Apart from exposing that malaria has become commodified, and when we were researching this, we asked the question, how much is a disease worth in Africa? It's worth a lot to those who are profiting from it, profiting from deaths. So it's like a perverse way of keeping us locked in the malaria cycle, because after years and years, they can't control malaria because they have been down the rabbit hole of vector control and resistance. And the GM mosquito and gene drive projects are more of the same ilk. And we know that there's a lot of interest in gene drives for agricultural purposes, because they themselves down a rabbit hole wanting to gene drive fruit flies and insect pests that are pervasive in industrial agriculture. The conservation lobby are interested in getting rid of alien and invasive species, especially on small islands. And it's an investable technology, because it could give returns on the products that will be developed, because these products will not be given for free. And who is going to pay for these products in the future in Africa? Does it mean that Africa will have to take more loans to pay off these products that will keep us in a never-ending cycle, trapped in this malaria cycle? That means we will never eradicate malaria. I mean, is this the idea, that we will always keep Africa disease-ridden? I'm just asking the question because I can't see solutions here. I can just see money-making. And even if people have the best intentions, but your intentions must be matched with the right solutions, sustainable solutions that will benefit Africa, not financial investors and the corporate sector.
Over the years, we've seen also the capture of our African governments by the biotech industry. We've seen institutions set up by USAID. We've seen institutions set up by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We've seen our own scientists and researchers captured and even sponsored by, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So in essence, what the pro-biotech industry has been doing over the years is capturing these spaces. And that is why even the decisions of the African governments have changed.
There are two important aspects to this. I think that first, you need to have greater involvement of genuinely independent scientists. And it's not strictly limited to, say, the biologists that are interested in creating or deploying gene drives, but everyone that's in related fields that has expertise in biodiversity that might be impacted by them. So first of all, you need to have a genuinely representative and genuinely independent and high integrity sort of scientific input into this, not folks that have things at stake. They can have their say, but it needs to be balanced with people that don't have any skin in the game, who are going to offer their genuine opinion as scientists. And I think that even more importantly than that, you need to have the broadest swath of people that are potentially impacted by this at the table, because you are dealing with organisms that, by design or by accident, have the potential to spread globally, or really into any environment where the organism is capable of surviving. And that means that the initial release may occur in one part of the world, but it may wind up in another. And it may have, very deleterious effects for biodiversity in another, and that may be on the lands of indigenous people. It will be potentially in a different country than where it was released. So really recognizing and coming to terms with the potentially global impacts of these organisms is necessary, because if you have the consent of the people in the immediate zone where it's released, that doesn't necessarily mean a lot if you have no means by which to control the organism from spreading much more widely and impacting much more people. So the proper process kind of looks like a rainbow, right? You got everybody at the table, because as a sort of technological reality, you can't say that these organisms are going to stay in one place and it's only a discrete subset of people whose consent and participation you need. That's simply just an inaccurate representation of what these things are.
In my experience doing work where I'm thinking of, what does it look like to engage particular indigenous communities in conversations around gene drive? In my work, I think really explicitly about values, right? Like, what are the values that different communities have with respect to the environment, or DNA, or modifying nature? And I think it's exactly right that was something that people were sort of primed and comfortable to talk about, is how indigenous folks bring certain values or worldviews to these conversations. But there was a lot less, people were a lot less likely to look at the developers or other folks' values that they're bringing. I think that just goes really unspoken a lot of the time. It kind of fits in with this myth of scientific objectivity, right? Like science, as if science doesn't have a culture or doesn't embed particular values, when of course it does. They just tend not to be named.
Well, I think, for Indigenous peoples, first of all, you have to realize that we know all too well that in the eyes of not only just Western science, but Western civilizations, period, of colonizing, European countries, Christian countries, that they have a dehumanized view of Indigenous peoples. And so the same kinds of standards that they would apply to themselves and to their own citizens, those things kind of fly out the door when it comes to their interactions with Indigenous peoples. So it's really hard to trust and to engage with Western science, and in particular with biotechnology, because there is no foundation of trust. There is no foundation of positive engagement from which Indigenous peoples can base, some kind of, collaborative work. So Indigenous peoples have to evaluate these kinds of technologies from their own perspectives. Western science comes with its own views. They come with their own technologies, their own approaches and thinking about who they are, how they relate to nature, and all of those kinds of things that are usually antithetical to how Indigenous peoples view the world. Western science is, kind of comes from a framework of dominion over nature. And Indigenous peoples are the opposite. And in fact, we consider ourselves kind of the caretakers for nature, that the nature around us, the animals, the natural world around us is actually older than we are as human beings. And so we're like younger brothers or younger sisters to nature. And our job is to take care of nature, to protect nature and all aspects of nature. So we don't separate ourselves from the natural world the way that Western science does. Western science, I think, likes to think of itself as having technological capabilities to fix nature or to change nature. And in our view, nature is perfect as she is, and that our job is to be a part of that. And we don't sit above it, we don't sit below it, but we sit at a place within nature with a responsibility to take care of her.
I don't know how the perception is from the scientific world, honestly. Maybe it might be beyond my knowledge, but when is really science, when it comes to even laboratory tests? Maybe if the trend is continuing like this, and then we keep losing biodiversity, nature, and all these things, even they are not going to get the input for their laboratories in the first place. So what's the point then? I don't know why. I don't know why all this modification is needed. Why not we follow the enhancement of what we have from nature? And then it will be added advantage for science itself, in my opinion. So why is that? I don't get it. I just want to link this with the notion of human domination, the mentality of human domination, because unless otherwise they make extinct the one that is existing and start from their own way of establishing something, they may think that there is no true domination. That's why even they want to try create even soul, with this cloning, whatever technology. Then, in my opinion, that is an absolute claim of domination against nature.
You can't recall it. It's not like a contained lab experiment that you can actually go and test and see that, oh wow, this hasn't worked. No, it's actually testing in the wild. And I think the other thing for me that's really critical is the issue of transboundary challenges, transboundary effects of the gene-drive mosquito. Because if a gene-drive mosquito is released in Uganda, it will go to Kenya. Gene-drive mosquito has no boundary, it has no locality, it will go anywhere. So what happens in that case? What law comes into play? International law. These gene drives could actually cause a conflict. So we may have conflict issues with our neighbors, and therefore the release of these gene drive mosquitoes require regulation at all levels, at regional levels, and it's important that people understand that it's not just going to be in Uganda. These mosquitoes will go anywhere, and they can have unintended effects. They can, decide to be some, merge and come out as a wild mosquito, and that will cause even more havoc that we already know.
I think we wanted to bring to the attention of African governments that first, you are complicit in state capture, looting of the state. Why did you find yourselves in a position that you had to take so many loans from the IMF and World Bank, so that you became so indebted that you were unable to invest in your own public research institutions to come up with homegrown solutions to your problems? Why are you unable to guarantee every citizen of your country access to clean water, sanitation, and a decent quality of life, a meaningful life? Why are you not taking these simple measures that will go a long way towards eradication of the disease? And so we found that African governments created this enabling environment for raw capital to operate and commodify and control a disease. Who invests, how much is invested, the trajectory of products, what products will come to the market. And we know that there's a very close relationship between the Gates Foundation machinery, investment in diseases, and the corporate sector, particularly the pharmaceutical industry, who are the primary beneficiaries of product development in healthcare, as well as the agrochemical industry in the supply of pesticides. So it's almost like it's a whole cabal of actors who are present also in other extractive industries across the continent. It may not be the same people, but it's cut from the same cloth. And we see this very much as ongoing extractivism from the continent.
Nous avons effectivement une impression de déjà-vu avec l'expérience des moustiques génétiquement modifiés. Effectivement, le faussage génétique, qui est le but ultime de Target Malaria, actuellement n'est pas encadré juridiquement dans notre pays. Et nous nous rappelons que quand le coton génétiquement modifié arrivait au Burkina Faso, c'était en l'absence de tout cadre génétique, de tout cadre législatif, juridique. Donc nous avons l'impression que c'est la même chose qui se répète. Et parlant du principe de précaution, il donnait tantôt tout ce que nous avons posé comme inquiétude et qui ne trouve pas réponse actuellement auprès des acteurs qui engagent cette expérimentation. Mais quelque chose de fondamental aussi, c'est la question du consentement éclairé et libre des communautés au sein desquelles l'expérimentation est menée. Alors, pour que quelqu'un donne son consentement libre et éclairé, il faut que la personne d'abord puisse comprendre les enjeux de ce qu'il y a comme situation. Aujourd'hui, il y a de la difficulté, nous sommes sûrs qu'il y a de la difficulté d'expliquer en langage simple et en langue nationale ce que c'est que le faussage génétique aux communautés au sein desquelles ces expérimentations sont en train d'être conduites. Comment on leur explique ce phénomène-là, ce processus, dans un langage qu'ils puissent comprendre et avant de donner leur consentement libre et éclairé. Donc nous sommes sûrs que les choses sont escamotées. On explique de façon générale ce qu'on est en train de faire comme travail. Et bien entendu, si la personne ne comprend pas les enjeux, il va de soi qu'elle ne saisisse pas effectivement ce qu'elle encourt comme danger. Donc ça, c'est un point fondamental. L'autre chose, c'est que nous nous disons que consentement ne devrait pas seulement être confiné au niveau des communautés au sein desquelles les expérimentations sont en train d'être menées. Et pour le cas du Burkina Faso, il y a 3 villages au sein desquels Target Malaria travaille, dans l'ouest du Burkina Faso. C'est le village de Bana, c'est le village de Pala, c'est le village de Sourkudigan. Mais quand on connaît la mobilité de l'espèce qui est manipulée, notamment le moustique, le consentement devrait être élargi à l'ensemble du pays. Parce que le moustique ne se contente, il ne connaît pas les frontières de village. Il peut tout de suite se retrouver ailleurs. Et même mieux, le consentement devrait aller au-delà du Burkina Faso pour intéresser les pays frontaliers. Nous avons un certain nombre de pays autour de nous, et certains beaucoup plus proches du lieu d'expérimentation, tels que le Mali, tels que la Côte d'Ivoire. Et pour nous, le débat devrait être plus ouvert et le consentement libre et éclairé recherché devrait engager les communautés au-delà de ces villages-là pour que le débat soit posé au plan national et même au plan sous-régional afin de pouvoir l'évacuer. Qu'on puisse effectivement s'assurer que nos inquiétudes sont prises en compte, qu'on puisse aussi avoir un retour qui nous satisfasse avant de donner un quelconque consentement libre et éclairé. Donc pour nous, consentement libre et éclairé, il n'y en a pas actuellement sur le terrain.
Même Target Malaria, les chercheurs qui sont dans ce projet, que nous avons plusieurs fois échangé avec eux, il y a des niveaux de questions où ils ne peuvent plus nous répondre. Quand nous leur demandons par exemple, est-ce qu'ils sont sûrs qu'en prenant telle espèce de moustique pour modifier ces gènes afin que la descendance soit par exemple mâle, ça ne peut pas amener cette espèce-là à véhiculer d'autres maladies? Ils ne peuvent pas nous répondre. Est-ce qu'en créant peut-être un vide au niveau écologique de telle espèce de moustique, il n'y a pas d'autres espèces qui peuvent l'occuper? Parce que les moustiques, ce n'est pas seulement le palud. Ils donnent par exemple la dengue, ils donnent d'autres choses. Est-ce que d'autres espèces ne vont pas occuper ce vide écologique et transmettre d'autres maladies? Ils n'ont pas des évidences pour nous répondre. Et on leur a demandé, comme le risque zéro n'existe pas, au cas où l'expérience venait à échouer, quelle est l'assurance qu'ils pourront recapturer ces moustiques qu'on implémente dans la nature? Ils ne peuvent pas répondre. On leur a demandé, est-ce que ces moustiques, ces œufs génétiquement modifiés, importés, est-ce qu'ils ne contiennent pas des gènes qui peuvent être toxines pour la chaîne alimentaire? Parce que quand même, les moustiques sont dans une chaîne alimentaire, les poissons ou d'autres s'en nourrissent. Est-ce qu'ils ne peuvent pas avoir des toxines qui peuvent contaminer cette chaîne alimentaire et créer d'autres problèmes? Ils n'ont pas d'évidence pour nous répondre. Et même en matière de législation, jusque-là, il n'y a pas une législation qui réglemente l'utilisation du forçage génétique. Alors pourquoi nous sommes en train d'y aller? Nous n'y sommes pas, mais la logique est voulue qu'on cherche une législation avant d'y engager. Mais là, nous sommes engagés dans le processus sans législation. Donc, autant d'éléments qui montrent, qui convainquent que cette science hasardeuse-là ne doit pas être implémentée.
We are yet to see peer-reviewed studies showing or at least answering some very important questions that we have already posed to Target Malaria and Oxitec around the release of GM mosquitoes. We would like to see the results. Are there correlations between the release of these millions of GM mosquitoes elsewhere in the world and the incidence of malaria going down or eradication of malaria? We would like to see an honest discussion about risks. What's happening with insect ecology? What is happening with evolution of the mosquito populations who are inheriting transgenic traits, for example?
Oui, nous avons effectivement visité les villages au sein desquels l'expérimentation est en train d'être conduite. Et dans l'un des villages, nous avons pu nous entretenir avec des jeunes à qui Target Malaria propose de se prêter à un jeu de capture ou de recapture de moustiques. Cela consiste effectivement à s'exposer à la piqûre de moustiques pendant au moins 6 heures au cours de la journée, et moyennant 400 francs l'heure. Donc 400 francs l'heure multiplié par 6, ça fait une somme de 2400 francs CFA. Voilà. Donc cette expérience, ou du moins ce que Target Malaria est en train de faire, c'est sur la base de ce qu'ils ont appelé un consentement. Et une fois de plus, nous ne pensons pas que ça soit le cas. Et les jeunes qui voudraient bien s'engager effectivement dans cette activité-là sont amenés à signer des documents dans lesquels on promet de les prendre en charge au cas où effectivement ils tomberaient malades du palu. Mais en discutant avec certains de ces jeunes, nous avons pu nous rendre compte que certains effectivement sont tombés malades du palu et la prise en charge n'a pas été à la hauteur de ce qu'ils avaient espéré en signant ces documents.
Embora esse gene drive diga que as fêmeas são eliminadas, não são na verdade. Tem vários estudos que mostram que, no caso do mosquito, existem vários genes que regulam a distinção de macho e fêmea, não é um gene só. Então pode ser que ao longo do tempo esse gene se manifeste e você tenha liberação de fêmeas junto. Isso tem que ser mais aprofundado esse estudo. Não existe um estudo, mas existem estudos já mostrando que no caso de gene drives em mosquitos, há possibilidade de escape de fêmeas também. Então isso vai levar ao mesmo caso anterior. Então, e a possibilidade de espalhar isso é muito grande. E eu tive informação recente de que no terminal do Tietê, por exemplo, existe uma liberação no local. Existem ônibus que vão para vários espaços da América do Sul e podem estar levando esses mosquitos dentro dos ônibus. Essa experiência em Jacobina foi utilizando praticamente a população humana como cobaia, porque havia tido liberação, mas não com a presença de população. E Jacobina e Juazeiro foram as duas experiências da Oxitec com população humana liberada, sendo cobaia, na verdade. Então, esses mosquitos foram liberados em grande quantidade, não houve uma prévio consentimento da população, que qualquer experimento ou qualquer entrevista que você vai fazer com uma pessoa, você tem que ter o consentimento dela para... Imagina quando você tem uma liberação de algum órgão, algum organismo que vai ter efeito sobre seu corpo, vai te picar ou não, né? Mas pelo menos vai estar presente. Então, foi uma outra responsabilidade da CTNBio ter aprovado essa liberação de experimentação em Piracicaba. Foram feitos em 13 bairros da cidade, com o cálculo de 800 mosquitos por habitante. Aí não era mais a relação de mosquito na população, a população de mosquito local, mas sim em relação aos habitantes, em termos de 800 mosquitos por habitante. Imaginando que o mosquito transgênico dure pelo menos 3 semanas, desculpe, em 3 semanas a gente teria aproximadamente 2.400 a 3.000 mosquitos em cima por habitante. Isso é um incômodo muito grande, né? E levando em consideração que também não foi feito um estudo aqui em Piracicaba sobre a permanência desse gene no ambiente. Isso é muito grave, né? Porque você está colocando um gene de transgenia de um mosquito que veio de fora para cá, que não é local, trazendo mais um híbrido agora, que a gente não sabe o poder de disseminação que ele tem dessas variáveis todas, da dengue, da chikungunya, inclusive da malária. Então é muito grave a gente ter um mosquito que você não tem a informação de como ele vai se comportar no ambiente, em termos de transmissão da doença.
The percentage of the the individuals that was killed was not 100%. Why not? Is because of the genetic background. The genetic background, I say the other genes, because if you have some insects that cross each other, they have a different genetic background. So there is some pleiotropic effects among genes. So maybe not all of them will be male.
Estas tecnologías no son tan precisas como nos dijeron que eran. O sea que, si bien la edición génica, si hablamos de la edición génica, podría ser como una especie de tijera molecular guiada por un GPS de ARN, pero sin embargo, eso no funciona 100% así, sino que ese ARN puede pegarse en otros lados del ADN y editar ahí. O sea que es lo que estamos llamando efecto fuera del blanco, off target, pero también una vez que el ADN se corta o intervenimos sobre otra molécula como el ARN, la célula sensa, porque estos son trabajos que se hacen in vivo, in vitro, in vivo, la célula sensa que hay un daño, que hay algo que se está haciendo y responde. Y al responder pueden haber cambios pleiotrópicos, generales, globales dentro de lo que es el metabolismo celular. Entonces, eso hace que nosotros tengamos que afinar nuestras tecnologías de análisis para estos productos, para ver qué es lo que realmente está pasando. La respuesta en una frase sería, no sabemos. We don't know. Pero como no sabemos, tenemos que investigar más, no menos. We have to research more, not less, en este momento. Y esa sería la respuesta. Precisamos más investigación, precisamos que esto se abra a la sociedad científica sin intereses. Estoy hablando acá de que haya una ciencia independiente, libre de conflicto de intereses, que responda a las necesidades y las dudas y angustias que tiene la sociedad con sus problemas reales de falta de alimentación, de pobreza, de inequidades, de falta de acceso al sistema de salud, y no solo quedarnos con las promesas que hace la tecnología al respecto, porque la tecnología responde a intereses bien específicos, que es de una élite muy rica, que lo que está buscando es aumentar sus ganancias y no realmente está pensando en el interés de la gente.
Because many researchers are financed by these companies, and so they can find something for these companies, but our search is in another way. We are like unbiased science, and we check because our search is in the side of biosafety.
O Gene Drive talvez seja o mais perigoso dos exemplos, porque ele coloca questões éticas que não estão bem definidas na transgenia. Essas questões éticas dizem respeito à possibilidade de extinção de espécies. A extinção de uma espécie que é considerada indesejável sobre o ponto de vista econômico de um determinado segmento abre caminho para a extinção de outros grupos que sejam considerados indesejáveis sob o ponto de vista daqueles que controlam esses processos decisórios. No Brasil, alguns grupos que vêm sendo extintos no momento são os povos indígenas. Há um avanço criminoso sobre essas populações que atende ao interesse dessas mesmas transnacionais que pretendem ocupar aqueles espaços com monocultivos, e são majoritariamente monocultivos transgênicos, ou que querem utilizar pela mineração os recursos naturais que estão no subsolo daquelas áreas ainda preservadas. Nesse sentido, se poderia afirmar que o somatório dessas tecnologias, desses desejos, desses agrupamentos, ameaça o planeta, dado que o que acontece com a Amazônia hoje tem influência sobre todo o globo.
he visto algunas intenciones de usar nuevas tecnologías, por ejemplo, para resucitar los mamuts, como si eso resolviera un problema de crisis ecológica. Porque la crisis ecológica no se basa en evitar la extinción o resucitar especies que se llaman paradigmáticas, ¿no? Como por ejemplo la WWF tiene al oso panda en su logo y tenemos que salvar el oso panda, sin tomar en cuenta que lo que hay que salvar realmente son los ecosistemas que sustentan la vida, ¿no? En el caso de los cultivos transgénicos vemos que en el cono sur son la principal amenaza para la conservación de la biodiversidad. Los grandes incendios que han habido, por ejemplo, en Amazonía, en Paraguay, en Argentina, en Bolivia, están asociados con el crecimiento de la ganadería, por una parte, y por otra parte con la extensión de soya transgénica. En el año 2019 me parece que fue que el gobierno de Brasil decretó el Día del Fuego. Y en ese Día del Fuego se incendiaron bosques, etcétera, en la Amazonía, y ahora están llenos de soya. Esa soya también sirve para la producción masiva de animales en otros países, en Europa o en China. Es decir, nosotros tenemos que entender la dimensión de la crisis y las causas reales de la crisis, que no es que se está desapareciendo una especie, como el oso panda, por ejemplo, sino que se está poniendo en peligro la sobrevivencia de ecosistemas enteros.
Yo diría que yo me voy por la bioética. Hay que respetar la vida tal como fue diseñada, ¿no? Entonces creo que el facilismo de haber eliminado el bosque y eliminado las especies nativas que estaban en el bosque no nos pueden sustituir por especies que no son, para mí, que son especies artificiales, que no nos van a generar vida en el futuro, ¿no? Nos van a homogenizar, quién sabe, estos sistemas de vida, y la biodiversidad natural que tenemos va a desaparecer, ¿no? Entonces creo que es importante conservar la biodiversidad. Deberíamos nosotros promover programas de restauración de ecosistemas para que aquellos animales, ¿no?, aquellas especies que están amenazadas y que están en bajas poblaciones puedan nuevamente volver a poblar los territorios, ¿no? Sé que es una ilusión, es un ideal, pero creo que todas estas tecnologías que solamente nos dan un artificio de vida no son las adecuadas, ¿no? Yo me voy por la bioética.
We are still trying to find our identities. No, after 500 years, there's been some decades that you can see a renaissance of the indigenous, ways of looking at things. No, and then we know that there is a systematic thinking. No, so to say, Latin American science, rooted in the context, that has to do with collectivities, has to do with the diversity here, has to do with communities and peoples in the cities, and even people that goes to school. Everybody thinks, no, that we are one with nature. No, everybody still feels offended if something is done to nature. That's still very much in the general spirit of Latin America. So looking at these technologies that will alter, no, nature, will alter animals, will alter ourselves, no, is really causes a lot of anger, a lot of distrust from the authorities that embrace the technologies. There is a strong critique of the science that comes from outside.
Y esa nueva etapa es cómo educamos al sector de tomadores de decisión sobre la edición génica y sobre la biología sintética, porque son dos temas que llaman mucho la atención a la juventud que está estudiando o al profesional recién egresado, que no tiene una formación en términos de acercamiento con los tomadores de decisión. Y muchas veces ellos, con esa emotividad de querer hacer algo nuevo, querer acercarse al primer mundo, vamos a decir así, pone en riesgo todo lo trabajado durante estos 25 años a nivel de los organismos vivos modificados. Y podemos estar en peores momentos de no hablar con claridad respecto a los impactos que se van a generar, que se pueden generar, que van a ser mucho más profundos con esta nueva biotecnología, ¿no?, de ediciones génicas y desarrollo de organismos sintéticos, en donde ya ni siquiera recurres al recurso genético ligado al recurso biológico, sino a la bioinformática, ¿no? Y esa parte debemos profundizar en nuestros países. Eso me preocupa muchísimo, ¿no? Y estamos haciendo poco.
I think, geneticists have had this reductionist view of living organisms since the beginning, and they've used the metaphor of code as if you can just snip a bit out and rearrange things, and it's going to operate differently, like a machine. And certainly, I think geneticists can tinker with life, and they do. That's exactly what they do. And the technologies have become even more deadly, more dangerous, more unpredictable. It always has been. But now I think some of the newer technologies are even more frightening in terms of the power that they can do to living organisms, and how far and wide those impacts can affect species, environments, and so on. So, but I think that's a really false metaphor to think that living organisms are machines, that they have a fixed code. Life has always been dynamic. Nothing has ever been static, and living organisms have spirit. And so there's no such thing as a static, living organism. It's alive. It interacts with the environment. It responds to changes in the environment. It responds to light and water, to other species. So there is always this dynamism in nature. And to think that one can control that, or even has a right to try to control nature or parts of nature, is really misguided, because nature exists in its own right.
Yo siempre digo alrededor de estos temas que demuestren, o sea, que den un solo ejemplo donde puedan demostrar que la vida se puede controlar una vez que se ha liberado el ambiente. Nadie ha podido dar. La historia nos demuestra, inclusive con otro tipo de organismos, ¿verdad?, cuando hablamos de especies introducidas a otro país, que las medidas de seguridad de una u otra manera siempre se terminan, quebrando, y eso es una vez que eso sucede, esos organismos que salen al ambiente empiezan a reproducirse, y sobre eso no hay control. No hay control, no es posible. Yo no entiendo cómo no se entiende, valga la redundancia, algo tan básico, ¿verdad?, como es la vida. O sea, es su esencia, es una de las leyes de la naturaleza, reproducirse, expandirse. Nadie puede parar eso. Algo tan básico como esto, y tan básico como el hecho de que todavía no conocemos, estamos muy lejos de conocer cuáles son las relaciones ecológicas entre los diferentes organismos. Eso no se conoce. Sabemos que existen. Eso nadie lo puede dudar.
Our thinking is about one generation, one human generation that's 25 years, something like that. So in the evolution time, the things will be very different. So if we start to release this variety that are modified by gene edition, this variety can cross with the other varieties, or the wild types, or the other ancestors. And maybe there is back crossing and other crossing. And if we deliver several varieties, these several varieties can cross each other or can cross with each other. So we can accumulate in the should say landraces or all the varieties, many modifications. And if you have many modifications, we can change the course of these new types. And also it can provoke some speciation in future, so this type will be so different with the other that will provocate some very distinct pathway of the evolution in comparison with previous one. And in addition, we have one phenomena that we will not pay too much attention. That is the horizontal transference. So in the evolution time, there are many organisms that have human genes, and also there are microorganisms that has some plant sequences and vice versa, bacteria, and plants that have some bacterial sequence. So in the long run, of course, these genetic modifications can also be spread not only by vertical transference or gene flow, but also by horizontal transference, as bacteria, as is usual in bacteria, in archaea, mainly in archaea bacteria.
Essa nova tecnologia também de gene drive, tanto para mosquito como para outros organismos, não evitam que, como é uma produção em grande escala, em muito volume, as mutações genéticas ocorrem naturalmente. E nessa mutação pode, como não é feita análise periódica do que está mutando, simplesmente se aquele gene está aparecendo ali, isso pode levar também a mutações que ocorram e essas mutações serem, por exemplo, favorecendo a transmissão de determinado vírus ou favorecendo essa população se estabelecer no sistema. E com isso você tem uma possibilidade de uma contaminação muito grande. Então essas mutações ocorrendo naturalmente num volume muito grande que é produzido todo dia, principalmente no caso do mosquito, isso pode levar a uma perpetuação desse material no ambiente, mas independente da tecnologia que foi utilizada, mesmo com o gene drive. Porque as mutações ocorrem naturalmente no dia a dia e a cada geração isso tem uma chance, né? Em muitas gerações isso tem uma chance grande de ter uma alteração aí que não é detectada no início e vai inundar uma grande área e vai ter um grande problema ambiental e de saúde também, com possibilidade de estar ocorrendo.
Y desde el punto de vista biotecnológico, esa mutación que se causa, se usa una maquinaria biomolecular muy compleja que deja rastros, siempre deja rastros, y rastros que ni siquiera sabemos medir. Entonces, tener la arrogancia de decir que muté eso y nada más que eso, es simplemente una posición arrogante, y en realidad las sociedades, los estados, las estructuras institucionales deben de cuidar a su población de las arrogancias, incluso de la arrogancia de los científicos, que son necesarios y que dan muchos beneficios a la sociedad, son necesarios y dan muchos beneficios a la sociedad, pero no se pueden autorregular. Para eso las sociedades tienen, las instituciones que tienen y la organización que tienen para garantizar el derecho de todos. Entonces, bueno, esa es una discusión que estamos teniendo hoy en Uruguay también, en el mundo, pero en Uruguay la tenemos, que hay un proyecto de ley que quiere delegar en un grupo de expertos el decir si esto hay que regularlo o no. Nosotros lo estamos argumentando desde el punto de vista biológico, pero también desde el punto de vista legal, político y social. Porque socialmente y políticamente es inaceptable.
Esa es una gran mentira, ¿no? Esa es una propaganda para justificar la adopción de estas tecnologías. Yo tengo conocimiento que aquellos que perdieron, digamos así, la batalla con la moratoria, ahora están haciendo un trabajo político intenso por el tema de la edición génica y la biología sintética. Se están acercando a los tomadores de decisión con bastante ímpetu, tratando de venderles este panorama, ¿no? Que nosotros podemos limpiar los relaves de un día para otro solamente creando organismos que van a desinfectar todo lo infectado, o que si hay algún organismo en vía de extinción nosotros lo vamos a volver a crear, ¿no? son realmente mentiras que para el que no conoce de ciencia, bueno, y se lo está diciendo un científico, tiende a creer, ¿no?
So in deficit models of engagement, the assumption is that, a public or non-technical individual simply needs to be educated into understanding a technology to then feel comfortable with it or perhaps authorize its use. So in deficit model approaches, in engagement, it ends up being a very unidirectional communication. Like the people organizing the engagement have the expertise and they need to disseminate it in a way that the public can understand and then kind of come around to sort of a, positive perspective on the technology. And so I see the marketing approaches to engagement as quite aligned with that because that's looking more at strategic ways to present a technology or intervention. That's looking at, using market research methodology to say what will be more likely to bring people around to this or, kind of head off potential opposition. I mean, in some of the events I attended, it went as far as to kind of test out scripts for commercials, right? If you heard this on the radio, how would you react to this? Which was a more appealing message and why? And so I think it's really interesting because, in this case, I don't think it was necessarily that because these folks were working on Gene Drive, they decided to go this market route. Like, I think it's just a more embedded practice in that world. And it's one that's not really being interrogated or looked at critically or even just reflected upon. Like, oh, why do we do this as engagement versus other kinds of conversations that could open up other kinds of learning, right? Especially if you can see folks in the non-technical public as having their own important forms of expertise or input that they can share, right?
It's really easy to become just a technician in any process that, purports to address oversight or set ethical standards or protocols because the way the processes are designed, they're usually like kind of exclusionary. They're hand-picked people who are there to either facilitate the process but not necessarily to stop the process, right? They're often like-minded folks, from the same field of technology or science, and there are not diverse voices there. I think that it's going to be really important for there to be diverse perspectives in the room to talk about setting limits to these new technologies, to be willing to discuss bans rather than to design processes that are designed to facilitate its progress rather than to really address the big questions and the issues that it raises for society.
This is a huge responsibility because they represent their nation. They represent Africa, especially the future of Africa and next generation. So first, before they decide, even at individual level, they really need to really learn the other side. Rather than, if it's rational also for an educated person, especially, to judge before judging, to understand also what the other way of knowing, or what the other part of argument is all about. And then not like superficially, but like as they learn, as they took time for science, they have to also took time for understanding what it means, what indigenous knowledge means. It's not just like an article, it's not like a reading article. You have to, because one of the learning methodology of indigenous knowledge has been living with it and give time, like ethnographical. Take time and understand, because some of the learning indigenous perspective is not and cannot be understood in laboratory or in classroom teaching. So this is a huge responsibility. Before they contribute negatively, they have to really be responsible.
Si nous avons des choses à dire, c'est de lancer un appel au gouvernement africain d'être plus responsable, parce que quand on gouverne, on veut gouverner une biodiversité saine, on veut gouverner une population en bonne santé. De ne pas accepter des expériences hasardeuses qui vont grever un jour l'avenir de l'humanité à travers la destruction de sa biodiversité, à travers des problèmes de santé des humains. On a aussi un appel à lancer aux communautés du monde, parce que ce qui se passe au Burkina intéresse toute l'Afrique, l'Europe, l'Asie et l'Amérique. La façon dont le Covid-19 à partir de la Chine a pu traverser le monde entier, si la manipulation des moustiques génétiquement modifiés, si un jour on parvenait à l'expérience de forcer génétiquement les moustiques au Burkina venaient à échouer, il faut dire que et l'Afrique, et l'Europe, et l'Asie et l'Amérique en souffriront des conséquences qui vont en découler. Et nous avons un appel à lancer aux communautés. Il faut une solidarité internationale pour soutenir les pays dans le combat de la préservation de la biodiversité en général.
Oui, nous appelons à un moratoire sur ces expérimentations et nous n'avons pas l'impression que nous demandons des choses extraordinaires. Nous demandons tout simplement de respecter les engagements internationaux de nos pays. Le Burkina Faso est parti du protocole de Carthagène, du protocole de Nagoya, qui impose le principe de la précaution sur ces questions-là. Et effectivement, nous nous rendons compte aujourd'hui que nous n'avons pas une certitude ou des certitudes sur les conséquences de ces expériences qui sont engagées. Donc nous demandons tout simplement qu'on observe le principe de précaution, tout simplement.
Bueno, podría haber algún debate sobre si nuevas tecnologías moleculares como gene drives y edición génica están contempladas en la prohibición de la Constitución. Yo creo que sí, porque la Constitución prohíbe los organismos genéticamente modificados, que es una expresión muy amplia, pero además prohíbe las tecnologías experimentales. Y los gene drives son tecnologías experimentales. Entonces yo creo que sí estarían cubiertas por la Constitución y estarían prohibidas en el Ecuador. Bueno, el hecho de que se quiera usar tecnologías moleculares como gene drives o cualquier otra tecnología se va en contra de la Constitución. El Ecuador, digamos, Galápagos es parte del Ecuador. La Constitución ecuatoriana se aplica 100% a Galápagos. No puede haber excepciones. Alguna vez yo escuché a un funcionario del Ministerio del Ambiente que para erradicar las especies invasivas en Galápagos todo estaba permitido. Pero el límite es la Constitución, porque las Galápagos son parte del Ecuador. Entonces, esas tecnologías son prohibidas constitucionalmente, y si hay organizaciones internacionales que quieren implementar esas tecnologías en el Ecuador, también es una posición colonial, porque quieren imponer sus propios intereses por sobre los intereses de una nación soberana como es el Ecuador.
In the kind of dominant discourses around gene drive or deploying other technologies for which developers want to see it contained, that assumption that islands are the right place to contain it is one that is very important to interrogate and sort of easy for many of us who come from Pacific cultures to interrogate, because we don't necessarily look at islands as isolated by the ocean. We think of them as connected by the ocean because our ancestors are really wonderful voyagers, and the ocean is an avenue and a pathway, right? It connects us, it doesn't separate us. So that's, a perspective that that has, if you think about it, an even longer history than these perspectives that islands are sort of inherently isolated and therefore good testing grounds, right? And so I think it's important to call attention to that, just because it's so taken for granted in these conversations, especially about gene drive, just that an island would be the best place to test it before deploying it anywhere else outside the lab.
Entonces va a generar un desequilibrio. Por eso Sarayaku propone de que estos seres deben ser protegidos, debe ser conservado, debe ser preservado, todo, porque caso contrario, todo esto está generando el problema, porque el mundo, occidental, el mundo que ha desarrollado científicamente, tecnológicamente, solo está viendo con una visión capitalista, económica, y no está viendo con una visión social, futurista, sostenible, a largo plazo. Yo creo que primero los seres humanos tenemos que cambiarnos nuestros principios, nuestras actitudes, a dónde estamos proyectando, a dónde estamos llevando nuestro planeta con todas las invenciones ficticias o malévolas que desarrollamos.
I think people also don't think about time. They don't think about how long it's taken for nature to be the way it is, to understand how, the natural world has evolved over time and how this concept of relationality has been developed, and that because they don't study that, they don't think about it, it's very easy to kind of cause this imbalance or cause collapse or cause disruption to whole systems without meaning to, because they're so focused on a technological fix. And if you think about technology, where has it gotten us really? What has it done to perpetuate life, to protect the sanctity of life, to ensure the well-being of all people? It hasn't. It's gotten us to a crisis point. And so there's not another technological fix. There has to be another way to think about repairing the damage that's been done and to restore the well-being of the earth, because that's what's going to sustain life. It's healthy systems.